From Radio America, it's Neal Asbury's Made in America, the show that explores American industry, large and small, and promotes American-made products everywhere. Put Neal Asbury's Made in America to work for you.
A very big welcome to you today. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffman. Hey, Rich, Sunday early afternoon, I was kind of hanging out down at my place in the Florida Keys, and I said, okay, man, I'm going to check in with Newsmax, just kind of see what the world is doing. And there it was, President Trump saying that the tariffs are going to be increased on Chinese products, or at least a big chunk of them, from 10% to 25%, is going to be done on Friday, and that he's very, very upset because they have reneged on some commitments that they had made. Now, the Chinese have kind of shot back and said that's not true. We always honor our commitments, and right now we are in a standoff. And it's hard to understand really what's going on behind the scenes. What do you think about that?
Well, I think I almost choked. Gosh,
yeah, I mean, we were going to an agreement. It was already a done deal.
They would never renege. Obviously, we don't know something that happened. I mean, do we presume that we know everything that the Secretary of State or Lighthouser knows, that the trade rep knows, or the president knows? I tend to doubt that. Obviously, something went wrong, and they're upset. And I tend to think that the Chinese totally misjudged, where this president was at and where this country's at, and they could have misjudged it on a number of levels. One, in terms of economics, not realizing how strong our economy is, and number two, not realizing the resilience and the strength of this president, given the fact that he's under attack, and maybe they thought that he's going to be taken out, which is. In terms of impeachment or not winning 2020, so they want to ride the clock. I mean, there are a lot of loose, little catalysts running around in the ozone right now. And so I tend to think that one of those hit, and that's the way it goes. I'm anxious to hear what our first guest has to say.
Yeah, well, let's bring him on right now. Dan Eberhart. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Canary. Dan has built Canary into one of the largest privately held oil field service companies in the U.S. By the way, both energy and trade are two of our favorite topics here. So Dan is involved in both. And on April 25th, and boy, what a difference a couple of weeks makes. What a difference one tweet makes, for that matter. Dan published a piece in the Washington Examiner, and it was titled, "What Does a U.S.-China Trade Deal Look Like?" Well, it looks a lot different today than it did just a couple of weeks ago. Dan, welcome to Made in America.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I would say I would maybe take that title and exchange trade deal for trade war and keep the same title if I wrote a piece today.
Really, but President Trump has just said earlier that President Xi of China has sent him a very beautiful letter. So you never know what's going on here. But Dan, here it is. I mean, you're in the energy business. One of the big benefactors of a trade deal with China will be energy exports. It looks like, to get this pesky trade deficit down, one of the ways to go forward was China needs a lot of energy. They're not blessed with energy resources. We have a lot. We're now becoming an exporter of energy, all sorts of energy, and China needs that, and this would be a great way to do some business and bring that trade deficit down. So how important is a trade deal to your industry?
So I have a couple of different aspects. I'll say that China is building 2 refineries this year that each of those 2 refineries need, or they're building others, but 2 refineries that need 400,000 barrels a day of oil each. So there's a voracious appetite for oil imports in China, and the U.S. exports of oil, about 20% of those go to China. So China is an increasingly valuable export market for us, and frankly, they need it. I also think, to kind of comment on your opening, I think that there's also U.S. arms sales to Taiwan, the U.S. North Korea developing situation, as well as the U.S. sanctions on Iranian oil sales to China, one or all of those three variables may also be playing out behind the scenes as far as how they're interpreting the trade deal. But at Canary, we manufacture in the U.S. and China both, depending on what widget and for what purpose and what time it's needed in. And this trade war has affected us because we've got to either eat the price increases or pass them on to consumers, and or examine what we make overseas and what we make in America to try to come up with what's the best formula for Canary's success in the future.
Well, now, having said that, but let me ask you this, and when you look at the landscape that's out there, I agree with what you're saying in just about everything you said. But at what point do we decide that we must take a stand on certain things, given the fact that we have probably negotiated a deal, or parentheses S deals, and something went wrong? And at what point do we agree with our president and say, all right, I think we have to do something about this? So how do you stand with that? I mean, at what point do we acquiesce, or we just, change it? What do you think?
Look, I'm a supporter of Trump, and I think he's diagnosed the problem absolutely correctly. I think there may be a short-term hit to the economy to get this done, but I was in a meeting with the vice chairman of the NPCC, sort of like the Senate over in China, in October, and they were, very wagging their finger, thinking, we're not going to back down a trade war, and we're prepared for this to last 25 years and all this stuff. But I think thou dost protest too much. I think this is hurting their economy more than ours. Our economy is strong, and we're in a position that Trump has said, we can take a short-term hit to our economy a little bit because our economy is so strong, to try to get China to stop cheating, stop violating, WTO rules, and to enforce, what they've already agreed to do on international trade deals, and to stop stealing IP.
So, Dan, here's where I might differ a little bit. I mean, look at what's happening to our farmers. I mean, our farmers are absolutely getting crushed. Grain prices, the lowest they've been in 42 years, and all farm prices. It's pork. I mean, it's just right across the board. Our farmers are taking it right on the chin, and I'll tell you who else is taking it on the chin. It's not, and President Trump is wrong. He's absolutely wrong. It is not China who's paying these tariffs. It is American companies who import products, whether it's for their supply chain for manufacturing products in the United States. Like you said, you bring in a lot of things from China to put into your own manufactured products. I do too. I'm an American manufacturer. I'm very proud of it. But we live off of a global supply chain that's been developed for years and honed in for years. And you just don't change that at a whim. You don't change it at a whim. More than half of what we import from China are materials and components for our own factories. So we're penalizing our factories. It is Americans who are paying these tariffs. And then obviously you pass them on to your customers.
I agree with you that it's American companies and American consumers that are paying the tariffs. I absolutely agree with you. I think that this is more of a look at this through a prism of chess, in that to get China to stop cheating on WTO rules, to stop dumping steel, and to respect IP, we've got to have this standoff to get through the other side. So this is like the short-term pain, short-term medicine to get to being healthy on the back end. That's the prism that I'm looking at this through, and thinking that the last two presidents just didn't have the stomach for the fight.
I agree with exactly what Dan is saying, Neal. I agree with what Dan is saying.
Right.
I agree with that.
And this is what campaign promises look like, right? I mean, our country has had, a number of candidates who've promised to get tough with China, and they don't do it. And the other thing, Rich, that's happening is that the Democrats are not fighting the president on this. In fact, Schumer says, "Oh, hang tough, hang tough, hang tough." You got to hang tough with China. And no matter what the president does, Schumer's going to come back and say, "Well, you're not tough enough. You're not tough enough. You caved in. You caved in." Well, how about Obama? He didn't even try. He didn't even try. He got nothing. He got nada, nothing. It was business as usual, right? And I'm sure there was a financial aspect to that.
That's exactly my point. I think that the way to look at Trump is not as a Republican versus the Democrats. It's disruptor versus DC establishment.
Exactly. Hey, Dan, do you have a moment to come back? I mean, I'd like to ask you some questions about the Chinese energy market itself.
Sure. Sure, I can.
Okay, very good. Hey, look, we got Dan Eberhart from Canary, a very large, one of the largest privately held oil field service companies in the country. He's going to be back with us in a second. You don't want to miss it.